Okay, so I want to take a few minutes to talk about the Unit 2 test on supply and demand. And I first want to just go over the format. This is going to be the same as the format for all of our tests this year. The first section is going to have 20 multiple choice questions. Those are going to be worth 3 points each, so you're going to get 60 points out of that section. The next section will consist of 2 free response questions, and those in total, I'm not sure how it's exactly going to get split up, if one's 18 and one's 12, or if they're both 15 each, but those are going to add up to 30 points, so you're going to get a test out of 90 points total. And again, you can do test corrections on this one, and we'll try and have that done before the quarter so that those test correction points will count in your first quarter grade. And what I've done down below is gone over every lesson and then the most important things I think for each of these lessons. And so the first one's going to be on the demand curve. And what I really want you to know is what are the things that can shift the demand curve. And that's going to be something like tastes and preferences. It's going to be your income, the number of the buyers, the expectations of future prices. And the last one is any prices of related goods. And so that consists of complementary goods or substitutes. I also just want to keep this in mind. This is not the biggest deal, but that our market demand curve is going to be the sum of all of our individual demand curves. Every now and then that comes up in a multiple choice question. The other thing is the 3 reasons why the demand curve is downward sloping, and that's going to be the income effect, the substitution effect, and the law of diminishing marginal utility. The last thing is going to be the law of demand, where as the price goes up, the quantity demanded is going to fall. The next thing is going to be the supply curve, and the things that are going to shift the supply curve might be technology, the number of sellers, the price of inputs, so the things that you're going to need in order to make your final good, taxes, expectations of future prices as well, and then there's the other one, related goods in production, like leather and steak, for example. With price elasticity of demand, this is by far the most important of the 4 elasticities. There's going to be lots of questions on this, and what I really want you to know is the formula and how to calculate the price elasticity of demand, the total revenue test. So if I give you information about the price and the total revenue, or the quantity and the total revenue, you'd be able to tell me if it's going to be elastic, inelastic, or if it's going to be unit elastic. I also want you to be familiar with graphing those, and graphing something that's perfectly elastic, perfectly inelastic, or if it's just relatively elastic or inelastic. The other 3 elasticities are going to be the price elasticity of supply, which is the percent change in the quantity supplied over the percent change in price. The other one's income elasticity, and that's going to be the percent change in the quantity that's demanded over the percent change in your income. And that one can give you a negative number, and if it's going to be a negative number, you're going to have an inferior good. The last one's cross price elasticity, and that's going to be the percent change in the quantity demanded of one good over the percent change in the price of a second good. And so with that, if you end up with a negative number, that means that if the price of the other good went up, then the quantity demanded of the first good fell, and that would mean that they're complements, because you end up buying a lower amount or a smaller amount of both of those goods. So that's the situation where it'd be a complement. If it's going to be a positive number, then they're going to be substitutes. And back to income elasticity, if it's a positive number, it's going to be either a luxury good or a normal good. And the last thing is the main determinant for the price elasticity of supply is going to be time. And every now and then that might pop up on a question. We should have probably stopped there and spent some time just making sure that we were really good with our elasticities, and then move into the second half of this unit, and that's where we start drawing graphs and shifting things. And so the first thing is going to be on the market equilibrium, and that's going to be when we draw our lines down to Q and across to either the dollar sign or the price. But the market equilibrium is going to be when the supply crosses the demand curve, and that's when the quantity demanded is the same as the quantity that's supplied. And from there, I would want you to be able to either identify or calculate the size of, or shade in, at the very least shade in, the areas of consumer surplus and producer surplus. And then we started getting into the curves when they shift, when you draw a new demand curve or a new supply curve, as opposed to moving along the curve. And the big thing to note here is that price will just move you along the curve. The last lesson in this one involved government intervention. We didn't necessarily talk about the fact that the government is intervening in the market, but we just talked about how they would, and that's with price ceilings or price floors, and then with taxes. And so the big thing to remember here is if it's going to be an effective price ceiling, the house will be upside down. Meaning the price ceiling, for it to be effective, has to be underneath the price, and the price floor, for it to be effective, must be above our current price. The last thing, just look for who is bearing the burden, and it's going to be whichever price change is greater. So if the buyer's price change is greater than the supplier's price change, the buyer bears more of the burden. And the way you can look at that on your graph is which of the little rectangles is bigger, and that will tell us who gets more affected by the tax. That will always create deadweight loss, as will ceilings and floors. So anytime there's a market distortion, you end up with deadweight loss. And for this test, it's going to be a little triangle that points to our socially efficient equilibrium, our initial first equilibrium. So big picture, if you've got an hour left to study, these are the 5 main things that I want you to be able to study. Price elasticity of demand, when the curves will shift, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss, and being able to identify those and color those in on a graph. Who bears the burden of the tax, and then ceilings and floors. Those are by far the biggest, most important things. And one of the things that we haven't really covered too much is just some of the things that the AP folks are going to expect of you this year. And so what they've given me as a teacher is a list of these 4 main categories. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about these. The first one, principles and models, is really where you just need to identify the information. The second one, interpretation, is going to be when you're given the outcome and you might need to explain how that outcome happened, where you're looking to find the cause. The third one is going to be when you need to tell me the effect. So if I give you a scenario, you need to tell me what's going to happen. So you have a situation where you've got the cause and the effect. I'll fix this. And then the last thing, and this is by far the biggest thing for this test, is being able to either draw the graph of a certain scenario, or I'll give you the graph of a scenario and you need to identify consumer surplus, producer surplus, if the ceiling or floor is effective, what the quantity is, what thing will shift, where you'll need to figure out the information given the graph that I've already provided. If I were to rank these in terms of importance for this test, this is, again, by far the most important, and then being able to manipulate the information, interpret it, and then you might see a couple questions where it's just what is the definition of, or what is an example of, so to speak. If you have any questions, please, again, don't be afraid to reach out, and we'll see if we can make sure that you're all set before the test.